Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this History Revealed program with Julie Ayer. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter Ratcliffe from the East Side Freedom Library to introduce Julie in just a minute. I'm Robin with the Ramsey County Historical Society, and we'd like to thank the East Side Freedom Library, Peter Ratcliffe, and everybody over there for all their support, as well as the Roseville Library for all their support and partnership for this History Revealed series that has been going on for quite a while now. I want to thank those of you who are members of the Ramsey County Historical Society, as well as the East Side Freedom Library. We rely on the support of members and friends like you to continue to present these programs. And we'll be working on new programs for 2024. Peter and I already started working on that. It's getting to the end of the year, and we'll have those up on our websites soon. So look forward to those and seeing you at some of those programs. As a reminder, please keep your microphones and personal cameras turned off during the program. That will cut down on feedback and technical issues. So put your questions and comments in the chat, and Peter and I will read those out for Julie to answer after her program. The program is being recorded, and it will be up on our YouTube channel and the East Side Freedom Library's YouTube channels probably next week. The Ramsey County Historical Society has a statement that acknowledges this sacred Dakota land. Minnesota Mekoche, the land where the waters are so clear they reflect the clouds, is the ancestral and contemporary homeland of the Dakota people. It is also home to the Anishinaabe and other indigenous peoples. The Ramsey County Historical Society acknowledges that its sites are located on and benefit from these sacred Dakota lands. Our CHS is committed to preserving our past, informing our present, and inspiring our future. Part of doing so is acknowledging the painful history and current challenges facing the Dakota people, just as we celebrate the contributions of Dakota and other indigenous peoples. And you can find our full land acknowledgement statement on our website. Again, that's on the slide on your screen. It's rchs.com. And the Eastside Freedom Library.org is up there as well. And I want to urge everybody to check out Subtext Books. They are in downtown St. Paul, and their website is also on the screen. And you'll be able to get Julie's book there, as well as a lot of our other History Revealed titles. So again, thank you all for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter at the Eastside Freedom Library to introduce Julie and say a few words.
Thank you, Robin. And again, on behalf of the East Side Freedom Library, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this program. Julie did reveal that hopefully next spring, she will be coming to town to visit and will hold a book event at the Subtext bookstore. So if you don't get a chance to get your copy of her book, before then, you can certainly swing by in the spring and meet Julie in person. I know that there is a stash of signed copies of the book waiting for you at Subtext Books. This is really a great pleasure tonight. We are living through a period of labor upsurge, and just night before last, we had a program discussing the past and present of graduate employees, unionizing, organizing, bargaining, even striking. And we had a video of the 1970 teaching assistant strike at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and had a panel of people who had participated in that strike. So young graduate employees are making history now, but so are cultural workers. So whether the Writers Guild or the actors in SAG-AFTRA, cultural workers have been a very important part of this labor upsurge, and it's a treat to have a cultural worker, Julie Ayer, with us tonight. Julie was a violinist the principal second violinist. I don't know what that actually means. Maybe she'll tell us. But she performed for the Minnesota Orchestra from 1976 through 2012. A really remarkable career there. But in the later years of her work there, she also turned her interest to writing and telling the story of musicians unionizing to make their lives more secure, more interesting, and to have more of a voice about how their orchestras operated. Julie was a trendsetter at the Minnesota Orchestra for involving herself in the community, organizing a number of activities that brought musicians and community members together. And in 2005, she wrote a book called More Than Meets the Ear, How Symphony Musicians Made Labor History. And we had a program with her about this book a while back at the Eastside Freedom Library. And then in 2012, after the lockout of musicians by the Minnesota Orchestra management, Julie turned her attention to telling the story of that lockout and how musicians responded to it. And we're going to hear a bit about both of her books, one which really sets a historical context for the particulars, and one that digs very deeply into the particulars at the Minnesota Orchestra. One of the things that I love about Julie's work is that a lot of it is based on interviewing people that she worked with. And so we hear lots of voices when we read her books. And it's the kind of history that I love because it really brings people from the margins into the center, gives them a voice, and enables us to listen to them. I do also want to mention, before I turn things over to Julie, Robin has mentioned that we're planning programs now for the year 2024. I want to encourage you, if you have a hot idea for a program you think would fit the bill as History Revealed, we would love to hear from you. We don't think of you just as consumers of the information and ideas that we put out, but you are producers and partners in our work as well. So if you have an idea, reach out to Robin or reach out to me, let us know, and we'll try to make it happen. So I'm going to shut up and turn things over to Julie Ayer, who's going to tell us a bit about both of her books, and then we can have a conversation with her. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Robin and I will be trolling the chat, gathering your questions to share with Julie when she finishes her initial presentation. Okay, Julie, we're all yours.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, Peter and the Eastside Freedom Library and Robin with the Ramsey County Historical Society for hosting this. I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to start with my book, More Than Meets the Ear, as Peter said, to give you some historical context to the lockout, which happened in 2012. And I'll start by reading you my mantra, basically. Nothing has really happened until it has been recorded. And of course, Virginia Woolf said that. And that, I believe, is the truth. And so when I took upon this first book, I will read to you some of my reasons and my motivations for it. I think I'd always been fascinated that at 26 years old, I could get a wonderful job in my profession of choice, my passion, my career, and be independent and have many benefits that weren't there not that long before. So let me read to you the beginning of this, More Than Meets the Ear. Begins with the preface. Snaring top flight musicians is easy because people who push brooms are treated better than symphony players. And that was said by Dr. Wilfred Bain, legendary dean of the Indiana School of Music, who built its extraordinary music faculty beginning in the 1960s. This book is a chronicle of symphony musicians' historic struggle toward improving and enriching their professional lives. The countless anecdotes and stories that were told again and again among colleagues, family, and friends in the late 50s, 60s, and early 70s have become a part of the collective folklore, informing and often entertaining each new generation. My Minneapolis colleagues related countless stories of orchestra life, challenges of contract negotiations, behind the scenes dramas that even then many musicians took for granted. That's the key. I learned that notwithstanding the professional artistic fulfillment of orchestral involvement, they found lives of financial hardship, no job security, difficult working conditions, grueling tours, dictatorial conductors, and a non-representational union. I thought I'd heard it all from my colleagues in Minneapolis and other orchestras until I talked to my brother-in-law, Rudy Nashin, member of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra from 1950 to 1963. His experiences with musicians, union president James Petrillo, his committee and union work, and the personal and professional hardship accomplishments that resulted reflect a major turning point in the history of labor relations of American symphony orchestras. The crucial role of the few visionary militants of Chicago and Cleveland orchestras in this national story derived from their willingness to do battle at great personal risk with the formidable adversaries of their orchestra managements and musicians union president, James C. Petrillo, one of the most powerful union leaders in America. In the end, they succeeded in deposing Petrillo, and Chicago became one of the last orchestras in the country to form a musicians' representative committee, a basic union right that had long eluded symphony musicians. In the post-World War II era, orchestra musicians and locals across the United States and Canada waged their own union battles. They had begun to discover common problems, and in Chicago, the movement ignited, and what happened next was revolutionary. The labor movement that swept America in the late 19th and early 20th century left symphony musicians behind. By the end of World War II, most orchestra players belonged to the American Federation of Musicians, but the union did not secure for them the pay raises and improved working conditions enjoyed during that period by their counterparts in other professional unions. Board presidents and administrators of American symphony orchestras made contract and wage agreements with the local union officials behind closed doors. They would subsequently announce the outcome by saying, "This is your raise, boys," and expect the gentlemen and meager number of women of the orchestra would comply. Dissent or complaints would cost the musician's job. Symphonic musicians became increasingly aware that the locals could not solve specific problems of day-to-day orchestra life, and they wanted to form their own representative committees. They believed in the basic union rights of representation and ratification of their master agreement. Players' committees were a particularly sore point at that time, not only with local unions, but with orchestra managements. Made up of half a dozen elected musicians each, these committees sought to effect change, but had little power. At that time, it was a part-time job. Symphony orchestras, major symphony orchestras also, very part-time. people had to do other things to earn a living, including roller brush salespeople, sell automobiles, appliances, insurance, real estate, clothing, hosiery, snow blowers, short order cooks, jewelers. You get the picture. Very difficult, very difficult. However, their professional integrity continued and they performed at a very high level in spite of it all. Furthermore, musicians did not know whether the conductor would renew their contracts from one season to the next. Fear, paranoia, and frustration were the hallmarks. Violin pedagogue and my teacher, Joseph Gingold, recalled in a 1991 interview for The New Yorker, among the players, fear joined with a sense of privilege. It was a feudal kingdom with the conductor as king, the first desk players as dukes, and everyone else as serfs. Former Cleveland Orchestra violinist Kurt Lobel recalls that Zell, who was the conductor of the Cleveland Orchestra, controlled everything at Severance Hall, where the Cleveland Orchestra played, from toilet paper to program book. He read the program notes before conducting, would call the program annotator and give him a hard time. He was the first one at the hall, would look over the parking lot to see who was coming in and with whom, at what time, and what car he or she was driving. He once called in a violinist, told him to get a better instrument. The player said he couldn't afford it, whereupon Zell said, "I see you got a new car," and fired the musician. In other words, this illustrates absolute insecurity and autocracy, insecurity of the musicians and autocracy of conductors at that time. The Chicago Symphony musicians, organizing from within, had developed a fine-tuned network that became a basis for national communication system that facilitated the exchange of much information of mutual importance to symphony musicians all over North America. They developed the first survey of major orchestras in 1962. They had a landmark meeting in Chicago in that year. For the first time in their collective history, musicians from North America's leading orchestras gathered to plan their future. With the formation, and this became known as International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, acronym is ICSOM. With the formation of ICSOM, could hardly have come as a surprise to the AFM, who is the American Federation of Musicians. The union reacted with fear and defensiveness. ICSOM was not welcomed. There were accusations of dual unionism. Fed up with the status quo and alienated from their locals, some ICSOM members would have liked to secede, but the vast majority saw ICSOM as a constructive part of the workings of the National Federation and wanted to work within its structure. The idea was to put something back into the AFFM that simply wasn't there. Their purpose statement, I will read to you, that they developed at that time. The International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians is an association of professionals whose concerns and efforts are dedicated to the promotion of a better and more rewarding livelihood for the skilled performer and to the enrichment of the cultural life of our society. It is further an objective to direct continuous cooperative efforts within the framework of the American Federation of Musicians of the United States and Canada. Another aspect they had to deal with at this time was the McCarthyism era. It cast its long shadow over ICSOM. Chairman George Zazowski and Vice Chair Sam Denoff drew the attention of a writer, syndicated columnist for the Chicago Tribune, Walter Trohan. He speculated ICSOM members followed the pattern which has worked successfully in communist infiltrated or controlled groups. Although none of the officers or committee members of the group have read records, in his view, ICSOM was attempting to take over America's orchestras, and its leaders had Russian-sounding names. Okay. Okay, then HUAC, House Un-Americans Committee, held a week of hearings in Los Angeles for the purpose of investigating the Los Angeles Musicians Union. They wanted names, just like they did with all the other cultural groups. And a few offered names, but there weren't that many to offer, and many resisted. Oh, I have to read this one to you. In May 5th, 2003, the US Senate opened long sealed transcripts of the closed door hearings conducted by Senator McCarthy in 53 and 54. FBI file, it's long numbers, describes the subject as, quote, self-employed as a composer of music, unquote, and reportedly linked to communist front groups. Within 6 months, Aaron Copeland was classified a communist. Using informants, the government spent the next 2 decades monitoring his whereabouts, analyzing his comments, taking notes. He said, I became a victim. I tried to carry on as usual, but I lost a great deal of time and energy in preparing myself against fictitious charges. A December 1955 FBI memo stated there was insufficient evidence to warrant prosecution. So it was all wasted and difficult for Mr. Copeland. So to continue with the labor movement that the musicians were experiencing, they had many other things to deal with, of course. But I will read to you a quote from Phil Sipser, who I will tell you more about in a moment, ICSOM's first labor lawyer, very influential, very important to them. And his quote is, the symphony field is the only field in which the lawyer does not represent the entire union, only some of its members. This situation is completely unique in labor history, and that's a critically important difference. The symphony members did not have the strength of the union behind them. Here's a group of rank and file who organized themselves, kept the movement alive, retained counsel, fought a 3-front battle against the AFM, locals, and management, and lived to tell about it. Labor lawyer I. Philip Sipser. George Zazowski, Boston Symphony Assistant Concertmaster and first formal ICSOM chair, urged his colleagues to consider retaining an outstanding attorney stationed in New York. It took several years for ICSOM to find a suitable lawyer. I. Philip Sipser, blue-collar union lawyer, representing iron, dock, and brewery workers, had never represented artists or professionals until he successfully mediated a contract negotiation for the New York Philharmonic. He served for 6 months trial period, and then he was hired officially. His appointment began an era of major consequence to many ICSOM orchestras. Very important and very influential. Okay, then I will mention that after all of this, they continued to grow. ICSOM continued to grow, network with each other, make gains, but still a part of the union through many battles to get there. But the result was many, many gains after all this struggle and activism and sacrifice that our colleagues from the 50s, 60s, and early 70s went through. And I will read you part of this list here. There were so many issues that they had to address. Part of the activism was to gain control and have their own committees within the orchestra, so, because the conductor had all the power before that. So then they could form audition committees and have a voice in selecting new colleagues. And they also developed an audition code, which stressed that there would be no discrimination. There would be blind auditions, which means it's behind a screen. And I had the experience of requesting that, well, I think both men and women do, removing your shoes. So when you walk on stage or wherever you're walking to play the audition, you can't be recognized by your gender. So that's always an interesting thing to share with people. Health and safety, that includes protection for your ears, that includes travel safety, post 9/11, much later, of course, but carrying instruments was an issue. People sometimes were confiscated from their instruments. Women's issues, that's a huge category. Of course, there were not that many women at the time, but gradually, because of the blind auditions, they were accepted because of their talent. I will read you a funny, not so funny, but anyway, it's Sir Thomas Beecham, great English conductor. And the quote is, "I do not like and never will the association of men and women in orchestras and other instrumental combinations. As a member of the orchestra once said to me, if she's attractive, I can't play with her, and if she is not, I won't." Sir Thomas Beecham. Yeah, I think hopefully those days are over. There was also child care and pregnancy issues. They had some contracts said that if you became pregnant, you had to give up your job immediately. And all these things were happening probably in many other professions. So we all had to deal with it as best we could. But of course, that's not an issue at this point. Another many gains were insurance, benefits, dental, health, all those, pension and retirement became discussed and included in our contracts. And trying to achieve a 52-week season. When I joined the orchestra, it was on the cusp of 52 weeks. And that was wonderful. That was a really huge accomplishment for the orchestras, coming from 32 weeks, not that many years before. So I hope this gives you an idea of the atmosphere and the challenges of More Than Meets the Ear and what happened, and the visionary leaders of that era. There are so many anecdotes that are shocking and sometimes amusing, but they do tell the story. And I was so fortunate. Peter mentioned appreciating that I had interviewed so many people, and that was one of the greatest joys for me, because this is quite a while ago. This is I started the book in 1998, and fortunately I was able to talk to many people at that time. And so then now I'll go to Defying the Silence and give you some background to this. So you have a sense of the battles somewhat that were fought over these past 50 years, 60 years, how precious they are and how fragile they are. And so Defying the Silence, and the cover was very deliberate to show the empty hall. And also this cover, on More Than Meets the Ear. If I can hold it up so you can sort of see the musicians standing there. They were declaring an unfair labor practice, and then it shows the stands overturned and all that, because without their commitment and risk of possible job loss, they wouldn't have been able to achieve it. So, and then with the lockout, it could have been an empty hall for a really, really long time. So I'm going to read you the foreword to this book that is written by good friend and wonderful colleague, Tim Zavadil, bass clarinet, Minnesota Orchestra chair of the Minnesota Orchestra Negotiating Committee during that time, 2012 to 2014. On the evening of Sunday, September 30th, 2012, the musicians of the Minnesota Orchestra, along with our families, gathered for a party in the Linden Hills home of cellists Tony Ross and Beth Rapier. On the surface, it was a strange night for celebration. Midnight, our management would be locking us out, and we would lose our salaries and health insurance. However, the overwhelming mood in the house that night was not despair, but defiance. Our management believed the entire orchestra industry was broken and its financial model unsustainable. We knew this was wrong. As the clock struck midnight and the lockout officially began, we raised our glasses and told each other that whatever it took, we would get through this together. Over the next 16 months, the party that started with 100 colleagues in a Southwest Minneapolis home grew to include the local musicians union, AFFM Local 3073, audience members, and enthusiastic orchestra supporters. Our Monday at noon meeting sustained us as we were able to not only discuss updates, but more importantly, check in with each other, assign roles and duties, and soon chart our own course of action. We became empowered to claim our identity as musicians of the Minnesota Orchestra. Our community, with us from day one, supported their musicians of the orchestra with an intensity that never waned throughout the longest work stoppage in the history of American orchestras. They displayed yard signs, sold out our self-produced concerts, marched in the streets with us, wrote letters and articles, and donated time, money, effort. Their actions supported what we knew to be true. They were not going to see their orchestra diminished. It was indeed time for drastic change. New ownership was coming in, and it was our entire community. 10 years later, this spirit is the guiding principle of the Minnesota Orchestra. Any challenges we face are done so together as musicians, staff, board, and community. For this privilege, we are thankful for all the people and organizations who supported and stood alongside us on our journey. This has become your story, and we play every note with our deepest gratitude. Tim Zavadil. I think that's so beautiful. Says it all. So I will read you, excuse me, just a little bit of my preface, and then read ahead the pre-lockout issues. And I just want to remind you that the unity is the thing to keep in mind here. It was the only way that that they could support each other was through undying unity. And they did it. And it's really remarkable, and it's a great lesson for all of us. This is a story of an attempt to willfully destroy one of America's most esteemed performing arts institution. Minnesota Orchestra, founded in 1903 as the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra. Musicians of the Minnesota Orchestra endured the most egregious work stoppage in American orchestral labor history from October 2012 to February 2014. Through the words of my former colleagues, board members, current former CEOs, and community leaders, I hope to be a voice for the musicians' extraordinary unity and for the sustained grassroots support throughout the lockout. It bears witness to the ordeal faced by some of the world's finest musicians. As with professional athletes, a lifetime of dedication to the gift of talent brought us all to this profession. In jeopardy was not only musicians' professional careers, but the very identity of the Minnesota Orchestra as the new business model developed by the orchestra board was utterly incompatible with the mission of this nonprofit institution. Okay. The typical collective bargaining agreement is negotiated between musicians and management every 3 to 5 years. However, unlike typical negotiations with union representatives, the musicians themselves negotiate and ratify their own contracts, a long-fought battle, as More Than Meet the Other book describes. Minnesota Orchestra musicians belong to the American Federation of Musicians and Local 3073, the Twin Cities Musicians Union. Throughout the orchestra's labor history, there have been short strikes or lockouts, but the lockout that began October 1st, 2012 became the longest and most infamous work stoppage in American orchestral labor history. No one imagined the audacity of the Minnesota Orchestra Association's willful attempt to diminish the relevance of one of the world's great orchestra and the betrayal of its mission. The pre-lockout Chronicle begins with the Orchestra Association, Minnesota Orchestral Association, MOA, adopting a new business model developed to address a chronic financial shortfall. The intention was to use the endowment to balance the budget for a few years and then to show a deficit at the time of upcoming negotiations. Had this model succeeded, it would have diminished the Minnesota Orchestra's stature and prominence as one of America's major symphony orchestras. The MOA focused on using the renovated orchestra hall as a rental venue. The board leadership portrayed to the community that all was well, but behind the scenes was developing a strategy to seek public funding for orchestra hall renovation, which they would use to their advantage in upcoming labor negotiation. This would soon be revealed by passionate orchestra advocates from the community. Much more would follow to incorporate this master plan, which ultimately led to the 16-month lockout. In early November 2011, the Minnesota Orchestral Association published a strategic plan called Vision for a Sound Future. In this plan, the mission statement was changed, dropping any reference to the orchestra. The mission statement is the heart and soul of the Minnesota Orchestra. Musicians were not aware of this not so subtle shift. The original mission statement, this sentence, our mission is to enrich and inspire our community as a symphony orchestra internationally recognized for its artistic excellence. The new mission statement says, the Minnesota Orchestra Association inspires, educates, and serves our community through internationally recognized performance of exceptional music delivered within a sustainable financial structure. The purpose of the MOA or any orchestral association is to promote, enrich, inspire, transform lives through music, education, community engagement, locally, nationally, and internationally. It is not to create or maintain, quote, a sustainable business model. As Kevin Case put it in his article, fiduciary failings, the case against Restless Symphony Orchestra boards, quote, the mission, simply put, is the provision and perpetuation of symphonic music in the public sphere. Historically, orchestra boards are composed of business and community leaders with a commitment to a strong artistic vision. Musicians are becoming involved on board committees. Some cases are board members. Orchestras are owned by the communities in which they reside, and these communities need to recognize the need for and value of their existence. Marcia Peck, cellist and member of the negotiating committee, explained this discrepancy. It became clear there was a deep conflict in vision between the musicians and management. Management made negotiations entirely about money at the expense of the mission, while the musicians believe carrying out our mission with competence will ensure financial success. Finally, on September 4th, less than a month before contract expiration and without telling the musicians, the MOA, Minnesota Orchestra Association, went public with a summary of their proposals. They repeated demands made in April, including over 200 draconian changes to work rules, 30 to 50% pay cuts, shift in healthcare costs to musicians, reduction in orchestra size, lowering the rank from 8 to 18, making it a third-tier regional orchestra. Also proposed again was transferring artistic control from the conductor to the MOA's president, Michael Henson. In the midst of a looming work stoppage on September 16th, 2012, the musicians defied expectations by producing and presenting a free outdoor concert at the Lake Harriet Bandshell in Minneapolis. Thousands of people eagerly anticipated hearing musicians in a beautiful outdoor environment. This confirmed the public's substantial support and showed musicians were exceptionally capable at promoting and producing their own concerts. Surrounded by parkland, Lake Harriet is a jewel in the Minneapolis chain of lakes, and this free concert had become a tradition for many years. On September 25th, the MOA made its final contract proposal, which was unanimously rejected by secret ballot. So the next thing that happened was, that's it. They're done. It's a lockout. So I will go ahead and try to give you an idea briefly of the incredible unity of the musicians during this time. One of the musicians is quoted, Kathy Kinzel, harpist. Everyone was surprised by the hidden talents that came forth in this crisis, from running a major concert series to sending hundreds of thank you notes to escorting guests. There was no limit to what we could accomplish together. And that's what needs to be emphasized, how committed they were to each other. As the lockout progressed, the most extraordinary achievement was the unity of the musicians and the formation and hard work of many committees. There were already several committees in normal life in the Minnesota Orchestra as mandated by the contract. When the lockout occurred, musicians needed more organization to combat the management's resources, public relations, and money. The musicians' work urgently began with no complaints or hesitation. There are many dimensions and layers to this story, but the sacrifice, trauma, despair, fear, and heartache of the musicians and their families cannot be overstated. All of these feelings and issues became elements of solidarity and determination. Communication and support for each other was a cornerstone of their unity, and they always spoke with one voice. Okay. formed, at this time, they met and they realized they needed to form committees in addition to the committees that were already existing. So they formed the following committees, which I will read to you. Marketing, public relations. PR committee, which include website, Facebook, and social media. Concert production. Merchandise, which was a big, big task. Program books, music parts, and scores. Artistic, which meant asking guest artists, all that organization of that. Guest artists, guest conductors. Education, they continued to play concerts during this, go to the schools, do as much as they could, reach out to the community. Free family concerts, young people's concerts. Internal committees. Negotiating committee, of course, that was ongoing. Advancement in philanthropy. House concerts, they continued to reach out to the community that way. There were at least 32 chamber music performance in people's homes. Gave a chance for musicians to speak and interact with people and understand more about what was happening. Logistics meant very confidential concerns regarding finances, health insurance, and employment. And it was a challenge for this committee was a delicate issue of privacy. And this is Norbert Nielabowski, who just retired, our wonderful contrabass player. And I would quote him here. He said, "I heard stories of orchestras that couldn't maintain solidarity for 16 days, let alone 16 months. The fact that we didn't have any defections or people turning on each other is one of the miracles of this story. Talking with musicians and other orchestras over the years, it was impressed on me you are only as strong as your weakest link, and we didn't want to have any weak links. There were so many issues, and we all knew they could beat us by dividing us. As for the lockout itself, a price was paid, and PTSD will be with us forever." More committees: finance, hospitality. That meant there were so many things. There were meetings, rehearsals that the musicians themselves organized. And this committee provided food and meals and to make sure everyone would feel good about that. And then, of course, the stage crew, who were behind the musicians the entire time. And invaluable, couldn't have done it without them. So in the meantime, of course, the networking organization that was formed in the 1960s, which I may have mentioned when I read you from the other book, is called International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians. Is all the major orchestras belong to it, and it is a supportive organization formed in those days to give each other support. So when this happened, the musicians of the Minnesota Orchestra were overwhelmed by the outpouring of support from colleagues and other orchestras and union locals throughout America and Canada. At least 70 orchestras and locals made generous financial contributions to the Musicians Fund. Many individual musicians also donated and contributed many times. Throughout the lockout, musicians of the Minnesota Orchestra were in high demand, performing with great orchestras nationally and internationally. This generosity is a powerful example of the solidarity of ICSOM, International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians. ICSOM is a network of 52 member orchestras dedicated, quote, to the promotion of a better and more rewarding livelihood for the skilled orchestral performer and to the enrichment of the cultural life of our society. Since their founding in 1962, the guiding principles of solidarity and mutual support have empowered them as an organization. This is a quote from the former chairman of ICSOM. His name was Bruce Ridge. He wrote this just after the lockout began. The past 50 years since the creation of ICSOM, it could be argued, has been a golden age for classical music in America. With the ability of musicians to earn a living, care for their families, truly put down roots in communities, America's orchestras of all budget sizes have become recognized as the best in the world. The musicians of our orchestras have elevated their communities, taught countless children, enhanced the business environment for their cities. Through short-sighted attempts at diminishing workplaces for musicians that our management are currently aggressively pursuing, all that is at risk now. Beautifully said. There was a great deal of community support, as I will tell you in a moment, more details of that. But there was a brewery, Boom Island Brewery, came up with the idea to create a beer named Lomomo Palooza, and it was created in support of the locked out musicians of the orchestra. A percentage of the profits from each beer sold helped fund music outreach programs until the musicians' jobs are reinstated. So that was really wonderful. There was also something called Working Partnerships, which is a union support group resource to help people navigate and access social services, including health insurance, energy assistance, which many were not aware of. Very confidential, private. Doug Flateau is his name. He's executive director based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. He worked with the logistics committee, had much appreciation, and they had much appreciation for his skills. He was extremely impressed with the musicians, saying, I never met such great fundraisers, how well they knew themselves, their issues, especially their unity. They met the moment. He said he learned a lot working with them and would use them as a model for the future. Brad Egan, our union president, Local 3073, attended all negotiating meetings. He explained the effect of the lockout. The orchestra work stoppage had a domino effect on the local music scene that taxed our entire membership. The local union supports and represents the Minnesota Orchestra and the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra and relies on dues from them. Our local struggle to survive. The stamina and undying support of our colleague musicians in all fields were remarkable, even coming from those who questioned our strategy, style, or actions. All of the musicians in this dedicated group in Minnesota astounded me personally with their undying bond and commitment to share excellent music with their audience. Besides all the efforts of the musicians to produce concerts themselves, self-produce their concerts, go out into the community, outreach in any way they could, house concerts, etc. The community took notice also because they were locked out as well. And this is a quote from Emily Hogstead, which many of you may know. Song of the Lark blog is her blog. She said, I'm very proud to have volunteered with Save Our Symphony Minnesota, a pioneering audience advocacy group that sought to keep the community engaged in preserving our orchestra. Support from individuals, bloggers, journalists, and organized audience groups was sustaining and invaluable throughout the lockout. That support continues to this day. It also brought forward former, current, and Minnesota state legislators who demanded answers, held hearings, wrote letters throughout the 16th-month lockout. Their persistent work and presence reinforced the musicians' commitment to unity. One of the bloggers said they realized saving the orchestra was on us. There were many bloggers, but the two most notable I would say would be Emily Hogstead and Scott Chamberlain. They were very prolific and really right on the money every time they did something, wrote something, didn't wait a moment. But there are many, many others. And we were so grateful. So it wasn't just the musicians that were locked out, as you, of course, understand that. The community was asking many questions and was beginning to organize and advocate for the musicians. The devotion and grassroots support manifested during the 16th-month lockout was surprisingly underestimated before this time. This is not to say it was taken for granted, because musicians are always extremely grateful for financial support and donations over many years of effort and dedication. But I believe it is fair to say musicians had not realized or been aware how much the community cared and felt ownership in the orchestra. They were angry, outraged, and ready to take action. The movement began with a letter from two orchestra patrons in Min Post 2 months after the lockout began. It letter is one of the seeds of audience advocacy at the time. A large grassroots movement grew from this. So the three grassroots movements that grew from this: Save Our Symphony Minnesota, SOSMN, Orchestrate Excellence, OX, and YMM, Young Musicians of Minnesota. And they were invaluable support for us. Former Governor Arnie Carlson was also not really behind the scenes, because he wrote, I will read to you some of what he wrote, but he did quite a lot behind the scenes. But what he wrote here, I will read to you. We have to look at this as something more than a labor dispute. This represents a very serious threat to the quality of life in Minnesota. We stand to lose one of the great treasures of Minnesota, Minnesota Orchestra, and that's something we can ill afford. At the same time that this was happening, when the lockout began, in a moving letter to the Star Tribune, October 6, 2012, 3 former esteemed music directors of the Minnesota Orchestra, Stanislav Skrovicheski, Neville Mariner, and Ado DeVart, spoke publicly in support of musicians. They wrote, as former music directors of the Minnesota Orchestra, we came to the state because we believe that it wants and deserves to have a world-class orchestra. We are proud of the cultural gem we have built with the musicians for more than half a century. It required long and careful work to assemble a championship team, person by person, always building on a vision of superb music making. This legacy can be swiftly destroyed, a tragedy not only for lovers of great music, but for the cultural soul and significance of the region. An orchestra does not easily recover from such drastic cuts, if ever. We urge the Minnesota Orchestral Association to do everything in its power to preserve this long-standing jewel. And that's a beautiful letter that they wrote. And I don't know if I need to stop now, but I have one more thing to conclude this part of the program, and that is that the catalyst that ended it. And the Save Our Symphony Minnesota, SOSM, sent a letter to Mayor Hodges of Minneapolis and the city attorney on New Year's Eve 2013, claiming the association, Minnesota Orchestral Association, was in default of the orchestra hall lease. And additionally, there were many, many forces converging to create pressure on the association. When the city threatened to declare a default on its lease, the MOA and the musicians came to a tentative understanding that ended the lockout. This was the catalyst that forced the MOA to reach a settlement on January 14th, 2014, ending the longest lockout in American orchestral history. And there's much more to tell you. that everything that happened during the lockout was quite amazing. And so many questions raised. And it caught the attention nationally, of course. I could read you just briefly. Alex Ross, who is a writer for the New Yorker, critic, music critic, and blogger. He said, the Minnesota Orchestral Association gives a dumbfounding report of its financial situation. This increasingly Borgesian entity managed to spend $13 million in performance per year, including $885,000 on negotiations and negotiations related. One assumes the sum went to the firm of Fellheber, Larson, Fellon, and Vogt, experts in union lockouts, and $616,000 on advertising and promotion. He had high praise for musicians presenting their own major concerts, announcing that their spring season was a lineup that suggests the isolation of the MOA from the remainder of the musical world. So, in any case, they did settle. And in the meantime, before the settlement, they did receive a second Grammy nomination, and New York Times listed Minnesota Orchestra Sibelius symphonies as among the best classical recordings of 2013. But they finally were able to settle the contract January 14th, 2014, ending the longest lockout in American orchestral history. I have more I can talk about, but it is now 6, and I guess I would ask you others what you'd like to do now.
Well, why don't we, Julie, thank you so much for all of that. And in the time that we have left, let's see if there are questions that people want to raise. I mean, I just have to kind of add that I bet most of the people with us this evening were unaware of the events or didn't realize the scale of this. As a Minnesota labor historian, if someone asked me, so what have been the biggest strikes, the biggest labor conflicts in Minnesota history? And I would say, well, there was the Great Northern Railroad strike in April of 1894. And there was the St. Paul trolley strike of 1917 and the Hormel sit-down strike of 1933 and the Minneapolis Teamsters strike of 1934 and a few others, but a 16-month lockout, which was the same thing as a strike, because the musicians could have caved in at any point and crawled back to work on management's terms. And so a labor conflict that lasted 16 months and that involved, I think, as you've made the case so beautifully, Julie, that this was a community conflict, and that the community was locked out along with the musicians. And then all of these community activities and concerts and performances by chamber orchestras in people's homes, and a tremendous amount of solidarity and activism. And apart from all the accolades to the Minnesota Orchestra for the quality of their musicianship over the years, this is an enormous labor history story.
It is.
Already a decade later, most of us have forgotten. And it's so important that you've written this book, and are keeping this story in front of us. And I wonder if those of you with us this evening, Robin, would you like to enable people to turn on their microphones and turn on their cameras so we can see everyone and see what this prompts for the people who are with us this evening?
Sure, we can do that. I would ask people, if you have background noise and you have a comment or a question, to state that and then turn off your microphone, just to keep the feedback back, as we are still recording. If you have something you'd like to say in private, we will turn the recording off after the major questions come through, and you can make that comment. So again, thank you all for being here, and you should be able to unmute yourselves. And again, we would ask if you have background noise just to make a comment. And then we do have a question from a comment from Love, who says this is a fascinating topic. She didn't live in Minnesota. They didn't live in Minnesota at the time. And then Gail has a question. Could you describe the role that Osmovanska played in forcing the hand of the orchestral association?
Yeah, he was, of course, supportive of the musicians, and it was quite complicated situation with Mr. Venska. He did support them, of course. He had to resign. I think it was resign. I have to verify that. And then come back because of a situation that occurred during that time. So, but he was supportive of them, of course. He was behind them, and of course outraged by what happened. And in my let's see, I think I could read that to you. Yeah, he wrote a letter November 12th, 2012. He said he feared, he wrote to the board and the musicians, that he feared that we may be on a path to diminishing greatly, if not destroying, the Minnesota Orchestra as artistic and cultural leader. Some are obliged to seek jobs elsewhere, and he says difficult to imagine that current negotiation will sustain the orchestra's future. I mean, he wrote also, 9 years ago, you brought me here and entrusted me to lead a world-class orchestra, which I have enthusiastically and faithfully done. It's my responsibility to maintain and develop the artistic level of this great orchestra. If the orchestra does not play, its quality will most definitely diminish. Please do what it takes, find a way for resolution.
Okay,
So,
anybody else have other
yeah, is
questions?
everyone too shy to turn on your cameras and let us see your beautiful faces? Hello, thank you. Your wonderful name. Hi.
Hi, Judy.
Hi. Oh, some of you are admitting that you're feeling shy.
Oh,
Okay. All right.
is that Volpe family? Is that related to Clem Volpe? I wonder. He's our former colleague. I don't know if it is.
Huh.
Well, while you all are doing that, I think in order to help people along, we'll thank Julie for being here from California. And we really appreciate you giving up your dinner hour to be with us tonight. And Peter, if you have any last words, I'll turn off the recording, but people stay on and we will keep you, and you should be able to unmute yourself. I do have
Thanks, Robin.
I
Thank
do have
you.
that turned on so that you should be able to.
So, Julie, how did the musicians survive? So, while there were some of these great community concerts and
Yes, but
fundraising events, but did the union provide strike benefits?
No, they were high. Some who could go to other orchestras went, and they were high. I mean, they were 70 orchestras were involved in knowing that they needed work, so they were in high demand. But many couldn't go because of family obligations or all different issues. But yeah, they pretty incredible.
Yeah. It must have been so difficult. People had mortgages and car payments and kids in college.
That's right.
All kinds of obligations.
You could think of, every kind of issue you could possibly think of. Some illness, really serious illness came up for some who had no insurance. Yeah, I mean, and then not to mention they're still trying to self-produce their own concerts, many concerts.
Sure.
And they did a great job, and they were always sold out, and people were very generous. But the work it took from all these 13 committees that I mentioned, that's amazing.
Yes. Wow. Manly Olson has raised his hand. Manly, it's good to see you. You have a question or a comment?
Question I have. At the beginning, you talked about the fact that the American Association of Musicians was not a supportive kind of group. What's the current relationship of the local group with the American Association of Musicians?
It's excellent. We have the musicians union, and Twin Cities Musicians Union is great. They're incredibly supportive. Brad Egan is the president. And he was a big part of, he was always at all the meetings and the union has been very, very supportive, unlike in the early days. No, that's all turned around. They've been great.
Great. Thank you. Judy, please. Yes.
Julie, I was president of WAMSO in the 90s.
Oh,
So-
hi.
Hi. And so I followed your career somewhat over
thank
the
you.
years, but I want to know, it's not a lockout question, but I want to know if you still play.
I sure do.
Do you?
I do.
With a
I
group
also play
or?
viola. I play viola too. Yeah.
Good for you. I'm glad you play with a group.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. We used to be Hill House chamber players,
Okay.
and now we're called Classica chamber players.
Okay. Well,
So we do play.
Okay, good. Good for
Please
you.
come.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you so
Great.
much.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
Oh, Love, please.
I can't remember how to actually raise my hand and
You're good.
Zoom, but it's been a while. That was really just so inspiring. I don't know that history, and I was living in New York City at the time, but that was just so interesting to hear.
Oh,
I love the
yeah.
history. I love how just the story of the unity, from the grassroots to the community
That's
to
right.
that it's just such an incredible amount of outpouring of support.
It was just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think they were, musicians did not expect that. They were kind of going off on their own, and then the community went, oh my God, we're
Yeah.
gonna lose this. We're
And
going to
I'm like,
lose this
I'm so
orchestra."
proud to be a Minnesotan right
Oh,
now.
that it was incredible. And then it still continues. I mean, the rebuilding was I didn't get to that part yet, but you can read it in the book. I mean, the rebuilding was very slow and painful, as you can imagine.
Mhm.
But thank you. I really appreciate your comments. That's really great.
Thank you
Thank
Oh.
you.
for the programming.
Thank you so much.
thank you, Sally, for putting in the website for Julie's chamber music group. And then
Yeah.
Susan had a question about what eventually happened to the MOA, Julie. Is it still in existence, or?
Well, I don't understand your question. I'm sorry.
She wanted to know what eventually happened to the Minnesota Orchestra Association, or?
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's still, it's still the MOA.
Mhm.
Could you elaborate further?
Susan, did you want to add more to your question? If she's still here? Susan, you can unmute.
Well, maybe the question is,
Yeah, what is the
did the
question?
bums in management get booted out at the end of this? So did they have to pay a price for their bad decisions?
Not
Looks
that I
like
know.
Judy has something to say.
Yeah.
I
Please.
do. I just want to interject that the current president and CEO of the Minnesota Orchestral Association is a woman, and the current chair of the board is a woman.
Yeah, two women. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, they're
two
great.
women in leadership.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah, that's very good.
great. Great.
As far thank you for adding that. As far as the two leaders of the disaster, Richard Davis, US Bank, and well, I forget the other one, but anyway, they're not in Minnesota as far as I know. I don't know where they are.
Mhm.
Oh.
They did their damage and moved on.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope that Judy is right, that women management is making a difference. This is good. This is good. Well, why don't we call it an evening then? And Julie, thank you so much for writing your books and spending your time with us. And it's just stunning to me how important this story is and how little attention has been paid to it so far.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I was, just to finish, just to explain that after going through the lockout, I had just retired, but I played donated services and was involved, of course, with everyone. And I really felt desperate that this wasn't being recorded, this whole story but I knew that it was so raw for my colleagues that I kind of waited and waited, and then they slowly started to recover a bit, and then COVID hit.
Yeah.
And I thought, now maybe I can go when they catch their breath, and they were doing remote concerts, and for about a year that way, and I can go and approach them, and they really talked to me. They really shared. So I feel blessed and so fortunate to know them all so well and be able to share their stories. So
Thank you. So I want to end by reminding everyone that Julie is planning to come to town in the spring. So watch the Eastside Freedom Library and the Ramsey County Historical Society's websites, and we'll try to provide some fanfare and let people know that Julie will be here and will be available at Subtext. And I want to encourage everyone to sign up for the Eastside Freedom Library's electronic newsletter. That's free. Find out what's going on. Track the Ramsey County Historical Society for their upcoming activities. And please, if you have ideas for programs that you would like to see us tackle in 2024, let us know, and we'll try to make them happen. And in the meanwhile, stay well, everybody. Keep these stories alive. Thank you.
thank you so
everybody.
much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
So
Julie.
much.
Julie.
Thank you both so much.
Thank you. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you
Yeah.
next time in January.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Robin.
you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you, Peter.
Julie, we'll stay in touch.
We sure will. Thank you
Great.
so much.
Great. Thank you.